wanted to share a few thoughts with you, and in fact, it feeds off of a discussion I was having just outside, but it's the culmination of a few things I wanted to share. You know, before I do any of these things, I do the obvious. I go online, I read up. These days I go on social media as well to find out if anybody's saying bad things about these organizations and so on. And what struck me was that, well, there wasn't any information out there. So sure, there is an entry for free zone, free economic zone, free trade zone, and what it means. And yes, there were some Wikipedia pages about specific places like, say, Kenya, and that's why I said I counted up 65, but that's old information, and it purely depends on some kind soul sharing whatever bit he or she knows. So my point is that I'm a bit blown away that in this day and age of information being put out there, that your society seems to be a secret society, you know? Are you keeping all the knowledge to yourselves? Have you got some secret successful recipe that you don't want to share with the world? And that's why I think that the organization can have a fantastic reason for being, and that's sharing information. It's really important. It's really important for people like me, by the way, because what are the resources that we use? It is, first of all, we go online. And it's been very difficult finding out information about what you do. So take that on board, please. Where's Dr. Samir? There you are. You know, you haven't done yourself justice, I think. You've been doing a lot of work over the past year. And so the couple of things to note from the few words you shared with us is the degree, the master's degree. That's really needed, I believe, in this day and age where, you know, one of the things that we keep on talking about on the programs that I do is knowledge transfer, education, the mismatch. These are old topics. I'm always amazed that we're in the year 2015 and we haven't sorted really fundamentally basic things out. So when I hear that an organization like this is saying, right, we're going to look at the needs of our business and create a course around that, that is fantastic. That's the way to go. Vocational training, I believe personally, is a massive thing that we need to concentrate on. I have a question for the Chinese delegation, actually. I'd love to know these, what did you call it, new age free zones. What is that all about? We understand that it's about services, but what else is different? Because you said that you wanted to try it out before you roll it out across the country. So I'm very curious to know, what is it that you are delving into? What is so new age about these new free zones that you're creating? I'm sure many other people would like to know too. And on that note, I will call to the stage the participants in our last panel. Please welcome Isidoro Hodara. Yes? Are we here? Hernando Jose Gomez, Jan Franz, Mehdi Tazi, Christian Pfeiffer, Majid Al-Suwaidi, and Dr. Hashim Hussain. You're welcome.
Who's missing? Good morning again. I'm not Isidoro Hodara, and I think he will join us very soon. He has some technical problem. I would like to introduce this panel and the objective of this panel. If you review somehow what we have been developing during this conference, if you see the documents we have shared with you, we always said that this is an association for the free zones. And we will be, let's say, the voice of the free zones before the multilateral organization will speak on their behalf. But we should first of all define what kind of free zone we lobby for and what kind of free zone, let's say, we'll defend and represent. And this is the objective of somehow this panel. Till today, we have been always saying that the free zone is a tool for economic development. We'd like to go beyond. It's okay. Free zone are facilitating trade, are looking for attracting foreign direct investment. Yes, this is development. We'd like to look for prosperity, which is different. Prosperity means if you attract foreign direct investment, you link it to local investor. Prosperity, you create job, but also you create companies. And you take care of your small and medium enterprises. We'll speak about all of this, and I will be more than happy to ask our colleague Jose to start having his keynote speaker.
Okay. Thank you, Samir. And distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the World Free Zones Organization for this invitation to this timely Congress, and I think we have witnessed in these couple of days some very interesting interventions, ideas, proposals, and debates. I was asked to talk about the future of the free zones, so if somebody would be kind enough to put my presentation on the screen, I could start, because Mr. Isidoro Hodara should be showing up in any minute. The presentation was in the, excuse me, I should, the green one? No, but they have to place it first of all. The presentation, you copied that in the desktop. Excuse me? It will come up. Okay. Well, while the presentation comes up, there it is, and now we are all set. Okay. No, I'm sorry, I gave you one this morning, and it was copied in the desktop. This is the one that you placed up, it's an old one. There it is. Thank you very much. Now, the main idea that I want you to leave from this presentation is that for the future of free zones, we can not only rely on tax incentives, both in customs and income taxes, but that we need to rely also in a lot of industrial efficiencies, in a lot of economies of scale, in a lot of collaboration inside the free zones to guarantee that these areas are going to respond to the needs of the firms that are going to be competing in the world economy. Just to remind you, to start the presentation, the average annual growth of total international trade in the past few years, in the past 20 years, was 8.5% per year, higher than obviously the growth of GDP. And also, it should be mentioned that many new zones, new areas of the world are increasingly participating in this world trade. And for example, Asia, the Middle East, Latin America already account for more than 40% of international trade. Obviously, Latin America and the Middle East starting with less, but growing fast and by now representing more than 10% of total international trade. Also, intra-regional trade has increased in the past decades. You could see, for example, that in Latin America, it's grown from 12.7 to 16.5%. In Asia, from 37% to more than 48%. But also that type of growth of intra-regional trade, that is that trade that where geography matters the most, has stalled and has leveled off in the past 10 years. So long-distance trade in goods has increasingly become more active in the past decades, have increased now at the same rates in the past 10 years as intra-regional trade. So that's also something that has to be taken into account by the free zones, where it may not only be their objective to take care of trade that happens near their geographical borders, but also with long-distance trade. Another feature of international trade in the past few decades has been as well that regions of the world that usually didn't trade among themselves and didn't have a lot of trade flows, that situation has been changing very fast. And total trade, for example, between two areas of the world that usually didn't see each other, like Asia and Latin America, has been growing really fast in the past 30 years. 30 years ago, total trade between Latin America and Asia didn't sum up to more than $5 billion. And right now, 30 years later, we have that total trade amounts to more than 250 billion. So if we just calculate any type of a rate of growth of that trade explosion between Asia and Latin America, that definitely it would be in the higher double digits. So that's also something that has to take into account, that is that there is much more trade between regions that traditionally didn't trade, and that is going to become increasingly important. Now, but not only numbers are important, and not only the volume, but also the quality of that trade. And it has been amazing how in the past few years, for example, Latin America passed from exporting 85% of the total exports were based on primary and natural resources, and only 15% were low, medium, and high-tech manufacturers. And 30 years later, less than 50% of the total exports are these primary and natural resources-based exports. So there has been a complete change in the composition of trade, and that has to have an impact on the vocation of our free trades in all these regions. That has been the same story for Asia that started before, but if you can focus on the second bar here to the right, less than just 25% of total exports from Asia are primary and natural resource based, while 75% are manufacturers and 47% are high-tech manufacturers. So the change is really incredible in the past few years. Services have been growing fast as well, and while goods had multiplied by almost 9 times in the past 30 years, global services exports have grown by 13 times. Some areas of the world have been growing much faster, like, for example, Asia, increasing its participation from 14% to 26%. But it's also interesting to note, for example, the Middle East in the past few years have increased from nearly a little bit more than 1%, 1.7%, to 2.7% in the past years. Probably that has to do also a lot with the development and growth of the free trade zones in Dubai. Instead, Latin America has been decreasing its participation in services, and that probably will have to do a lot with situations and concerns that have to do with languages, with the ability to develop software, the ability to develop other entrepreneurial services that are not the strong part, the stronger part of the capacities that we find in Latin America. Another feature of the world has been that Asia and especially the Pacific countries of Latin America have been actively signing trade agreements, and those that are the most, the darker red are the ones that have been signing more trade agreements like Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, here China, Japan, several of the Asian countries. And that definitely is generating trade diversion in the world. And also strong ties between the Northern Hemisphere, the US, the Europeans that have been also very active signing this type of trade agreements. That also has changed many of the trade patterns and also generate a lot of new opportunities to both free zones in Asia and Latin America. As you well know, these free zones are in the past few years have been key instruments in attracting and developing these trade trends and attracting foreign direct investment. More than 135 countries already in the world have free zones. And just to have an idea, more than 50 million employments have been created by free zones in Asia. In Latin America, it's more between 760,000. Yesterday, Juan Pablo Rivera was telling us it was 900,000. So those have been becoming an important part of all the story of the growing of world trade. But recent studies that we have done in Colombia has shown up interesting things, is that free zones are becoming centers for cluster development and entry into global value chains and also regional value chains. Something that has been interesting, for example, in the case of the free zones of Colombia, is that the total sales from these free zones, the ones that have been growing the most in the past 10 years, have been sales within the free zone. So definitely it is showing up that there has been generating inside the free zones value chains, suppliers' value chains that are important to foster domestic value chains that are going to be incorporated later into global value chains. The second most important growth has been to other countries, so definitely these free zones continue to be the most important instrument to develop exports of our countries into the world trade. And another very interesting thing is that the third most important growth of free zones has been to other free zones. So free zones are starting to specialize. The fragmentation of supply chains have permitted them to specialize in tasks, in sectors, and they have been very active, complementing each other and selling between themselves to incorporate them into the regional value chains. Another issue is that the free zones have been increasingly important to promote sophisticated and strategic export-based economic activities. Recent study we did among all these enterprises in Colombia, both in free zones and in the customs territory, has shown us that the average return on equity of these companies is much higher in the free zones, especially in those areas that have a sophisticated technology, sophisticated skills that are used in their productions. And for example, machinery and equipment has been one of those areas where the return on equity is double the one that receive that are of the performance of the firms that are in the customs territory. So that definitely is showing us that both free zones are starting to specialize, are starting to become clusters in itself, are starting to develop supply chains, and also that these free zones are becoming increasingly important to foster the development of strategic export high-tech production. Obviously, free zones in different areas of the world have different objectives, and in the end, all of them promote trade. But for example, the free zones in Latin America have been more an instrument for product diversification and generation of export supply, while in free zones in Asia, the purpose has been more the emphasis has been more in promoting sectors or regions. In Latin America, the government intervention is low. The engagement of government with the private sector in terms of generating a private-public association has not been as strong as the PPPs that have been seen in Asia. And also the type of incentives that have been given, while in Latin America has been more based on type of profit and custom taxes. In Asia, they are also used, but also you have many incentives in terms of the sector or region that where they develop their activities. So we have as well that we can learn from each other and see which are the best practices that guarantee a good development of these free zones. Some topics that will have to be considered for the future of free zones. Definitely stronger communications between free zones all over the world, and I think that the timely creation of this World Free Zone Organization is very important to share best practices between free zones all around the world. Also, the joint projects and investments between free zones to develop regional value chains, global value chains, and even domestic value chains are going to be also something that we have to look upon. A greater and better use of ICTs for management and communications is something that will be increasingly demanding for free zones. And as free zones are becoming clusters, professional training programs and research and development facilities inside free zones are going to be a key for the success of these free zones in certain sectors or in certain tasks that will be common in these areas. Other area where we will have to consider a lot of efforts to be done is on the area of quality and cost of services. And there, that will demand a lot of private-public partnerships to guarantee energy, logistics, transportation, security, customs, and administrative procedures that are given at the correct cost and will guarantee the competitiveness of these free zones. We'll have to develop a fluent dialogue and transparent relations with governing bodies, better dialogue between Finance Ministry and the Economy Ministry to dispel fiscal myth. Some calculations that we have done in our local country has proven that for every dollar that is sacrificed by the tax administration with the free zones, the government recovers between $4 and $5 for each dollar that it has invested in terms of tax incentives with the free zone. So a business, a project that has a return of 500% has to be a good investment for the government, and that is what we have been trying to explain to the Finance Ministry. The problem is that while the Economic Ministry is looking ahead 20, 30 years to the development of the world, usually the Finance Minister is just looking ahead to in the same year or 2 years in terms of the revenue in terms of the fiscal deficit that it has to manage. So sometimes a good conversation there to foster the conversation between the ministries is going to be a good issue. And also, we have to every day try to increase and take advantage of the synergies that are generated between companies within a free zone, example, shared services, facilities, transportation, logistics, joint research and development projects. Some concluding remarks. Globalization implies greater physical and human capital mobility. That has been understood by countries like our host here, the UAE. Most products and industries nowadays are international in scope. All companies should start to be international since their inception. Latin America, Asia, Middle East are going to become increasingly key players in global economics, as they represent most of the emerging countries of the world. Free zones are key instruments for countries to compete in today's world, and that will guarantee the competitiveness of many of our countries. And for that, we must be attractive for businesses in order to interest investors in sophisticated and strategic export-based activities. Free zones, as I stressed during my presentation, should promote the cluster development, productive transformations, high value-added production and growth of strategic goods and services, and that would be the way to attain economies of scale, to attain positive externalities that will reduce costs and guarantee the sustainability of the enterprises working and developing their activities in the free zones. Finally, the idea with which I started, governments should not only offer tax incentives and simple procedures to companies in free zones, but also promote research and development in free zones, training and skills development in free zones, competitive environment both in terms of logistics, utilities, labor, market research and information, and also foster trade integration initiatives like international value chains products, trade fairs, business forums, etc. With that, I finish. Thank you for your attention.
We thank the previous speaker who gave us a thorough analysis of the experience of Colombia and the way to the future in a country that is very rich in experiences in free zones. Over 100 free zones are already functioning in Colombia. I am sorry if the moderator came in a little later. He has good reasons for that. But let me try to tell you what was the rationale for this panel. And will you tell me how to use this? Since I missed the technical.
This is forward, this is backwards. This
okay.
is the last one.
Okay, thank you.
Don't touch that.
Okay, thank you. We wanted to look with a strategic perspective to the horizon, to where we are going with this useful instrument called free zones. And where will the world be in terms of free zones in the future? And in order to do that, we try to discern some of the trends in my presentation that are happening in world trade and that will have an impact on free zones in the future. And the three trends that I selected to highlight today were already mentioned, an increased expansion of trading tasks. We have seen trade in goods, trade in services, trade in factors of production, trade in data, but increasingly what we see is trade in tasks. The second factor that comes from the environment in which free trade is developing is the prospect for international negotiations setting disciplines to services. This is something new. We didn't live with it until now. We might have to deal with it in the future. And the third one I selected, there might have been a lot more, has to do with the impact of increasing global connectivity. All these have already, fortunately, been mentioned during the course of our meeting, so that the last panel has the benefit of making references to what has already been said elsewhere. And in these introductory remarks, what I want to say is trade in tasks might very well be illustrated by this little animal, pieces of which and services contributing to which have come from a number of countries. And there is no better place in the world to lodge the production of inputs and services going into this little animal, little toy, than in free zones. Another one example of trading tasks has to do with the development of a chip, a high-speed chip by Texas Instruments, I believe. I have underlined, or I have put in bold, rather, the tasks, the services that are embedded into the final product. And as you can see, going through the 10 different tasks, we have about half a dozen that involve services which continue normally embedded into the product. And there's no better poised part of the world to engage into this list of activities than the network of free zones. If you are curious as I am, and you look into the instructions in the plane in one plane in which you fly, normally people don't do that. I did it only to show you the last line. And the last line says that this plane was finally assembled in a certain country. It no longer dares say, made in a certain country. The frontiers are blurred. The made in concept is more made in the world and less made in country A, B, or C. And this is part of the trend. The second trend I mentioned, which can be seen with a little wariness by some, is that of negotiations on international trading services. As you know, when WTO came into being, a full set of disciplines was developed for trading goods. It is, after all, the heritage of GATT. GATT dealt with goods. It was a customs or a tariff-oriented club. Within WTO, we have GATS, which is General Agreement on Trading Services. But this one did not fully develop, so it promised to continue developing itself as time develops. But as many of our speakers have said, WTO has difficulties in getting going some of the negotiations. And so a number of countries, some 60-something countries, have started to negotiate on their own. And these include the main partners in trading service, the US, the European Union, and many others, including a few developing countries. which includes my country, I should say. This is not the only way in which new regulations into trading services may creep. We have, at the same time, plurilateral trade negotiations going on in the Pacific Rim, known as the TPP, and multilateral negotiations going on the North Atlantic, which is basically a negotiation within the United States and the European Union. In both cases, participants in the negotiation are almost sure to include some disciplines in trade in services. Since our free zones at present and our free zones in the future will include a lot of trading tasks and services, then this is something that we should follow closely. It's a trend that may affect the future of our free zones. And lastly, I might be kind and not mention to you, because it has already been mentioned, that in the future lies a tremendous increase in trade in goods, in services, in tasks, in people, and in data. And free zones are poised to take advantage of this increase in trade. So, without further ado, I think, having made these introductory remarks, I would ask the distinguished panelists to go on with their presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, distinguished persons, ladies and gentlemen. This is an impressive assembly of Free Zone representatives. I am honored to be among you today. It's my privilege to speak with you about the future of the United States Foreign Trade Zones program. In order to talk about the future, I'll take you briefly to the past. We will talk about trends during the middle years of the U.S. Foreign Trade Zones program, and finally, we will consider how both historic and emerging factors might impact the future. U.S. foreign trade zones were created in 1934. For the first 36 years, until 1970, there were a grand total of 8 foreign trade zones and 3 manufacturing zones. Progress, yes. Vast growth, no. In 1980, the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones proposed a customs ruling on behalf of its members that would allow manufacturers to bring foreign-sourced parts or commodities into a zone, incorporate those inputs with U.S. labor into a finished product, then enter the finished product into the U.S. commerce. U.S. Customs accepted our recommendation. Manufacturing in a zone now had a tremendous advantage. With this customs ruling, Foreign Trade Zones program in the United States began its remarkable growth. By 2013, there were 177 active foreign trade zones with 289 manufacturing or production zones. 390,000 Americans worked in zones, the largest volume recorded at the time. My zone project is located at the inland port of Battle Creek, Michigan. Battle Creek is a very small city with 52,000 people. About 40 years ago, 2 large employing factories closed in Battle Creek. The economy of the city fell to its knees. Unemployment rose to nearly 18%. But within a few years, Battle Creek's foreign trade zone was established across its 3,000-acre industrial park. Foreign direct investment began to flow in. Japan, Germany, Denmark, Scotland, Austria, Canada, and the United States now contribute 95 manufacturing companies and 10,000 jobs. All the foreign-based firms cited the availability of the foreign trade zone and the port of entry as among the reasons for their location decisions. Not all the companies used the zone. Some used it for only a few years. Others used the zone for decades. Those were the foreign trade zone middle years, a high point of manufacturing, investment, and growth across the United States. The 21st century brought challenges to the Foreign Trade Zones program. Companies began to make just-in-time decisions about the sources of their inputs, their supply chain logistics, and their expansion plans. A solution came in 2009 for those just-in-time decisions, with a new framework for organizing the geography of U.S. foreign trade zones. Greater flexibility and a streamlined approval process removed the barriers to small and medium-sized enterprises. The U.S. Foreign Trade Zone program grew in economic importance. That economic importance gave the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones a prominent voice in determining the new direction of trade policy and federal regulations. The National Association of Foreign Trade Zones, Customs and Border Protection, and the U.S. Department of Commerce worked together to improve access and flexibility for the U.S. Foreign Trade Zones program. Let's look to the future now. This year, U.S. Automated Customs Environment rolls out. It will bring improvements in technology, communication tools, and computer capabilities, and interagency transparency between other participating government authorities and U.S. Customs. All customs filing in the United States will be conducted electronically with no paper forms. And I heard yesterday that this is already the case in Dubai. I'm sure others are well ahead of us in customs filings electronically as well. Nonetheless, all participating government agencies plan to work together using a single window with customs. Goods arriving at U.S. ports that are transferred to other bonded transportation routes may be monitored to deploy information to Customs and Border Protection field offices across the United States. Working together will greatly improve communication between the trade and government agencies. The National Association of Foreign Trade Zones supports this important development. Our own subject matter experts contributed their time and expertise side by side with Customs and Border Protection and other federal agencies to ensure the new data fields in the automated customs environment will address the very unique needs of our foreign trade zones. We may anticipate the implementation of the automated customs environment to play a role in many aspects of safety and security monitoring, too. The objectives and services of the World FZO might someday contribute to efficiencies for zone users through electronic tracking of goods and services internationally. Bringing together free zone participants for the purpose of sharing knowledge, networking, and education is a good start for all of us. Gathering and disseminating knowledge about our free zones could contribute to a future capability for zone-to-zone transfer of goods and services from nation to nation. When we advocate for public awareness for free zones and data transparency, progress becomes possible in the public sector. Free zones could take the lead, tracking goods and services tracked internationally. We are intimately knowledgeable about our own goods and services traded. Some of us have more robust inventory control systems than non-free zone sites. Perhaps we can pioneer the tracking of goods and services from zone to zone. The influence of global standards for transparency could increase the use of free zones around the world. Tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade will undoubtedly exist for the foreseeable future. The U.S. Foreign Trade Zones program will continue to address those barriers no differently than it has in the past, preparing solutions for greater access, flexibility, and overcoming the barriers we cannot yet anticipate. I believe that together we may walk on a path of best practices and innovations in communication technologies to promote the growth of trade between all free zones. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to give you a perspective of a live case or a live free zone that started back in the middle of 2007. I'm talking about Tanger Med in Morocco. Now, I'll be touching specifically on the subject which is a recurring comment, and that is, how do free zones contribute to FDI, job creation? How do they bring up and anchor activity and support and foster the development of an economic activity? Here we go. So, in few words, Tanger Med is what we call an integrated industrial port complex. In other words, it is a cluster that encompasses two major blocks. A block which is a port, which is a deep-sea port located on the Strait of Gibraltar, which is there to connect us to global logistics flows, and I think the word was said, to connect us to global trade. But not only that, it is there to support the development of economic activity that is captured through an array of different free zones, and activity zones are developed right behind and adjacent to the port. As we stand today, this project this project represents, in terms of development, 650 companies, approximately $4 billion US in terms of public spending and $4 billion US in terms of private. That is, I think, one of the key points that I want to touch on, which is the project structuring. One of the key decisions from day one was to make sure that we do engage into PPPs, both into the port development, but also into the free zone development. Port development, a good translation of it was obviously concession agreements. And in terms of the cluster and free zones development, that translated into, for example, the state making available public land, and we as a private incorporated company taking over and making sure that we're developing zones that are standing at the standards and expectations of global corporations. Now, we don't see free zones as, I think it was, I fully share the comment that was made by Isidoro and other panelists. We don't see free zones as an objective, but obviously as a tool. The way we look at our cluster today is more, what kind of competencies did we develop? And what are the competencies, what are the skill sets, what are the sectors, and in particular, in our case, industrial sectors that we have managed to attract. Now, having said that, one of the other major point, I think, is the quality of governance. I think we have a very good model here in Dubai. This is something that we also applied in Morocco, making sure that both port and free zones are under the same governance, under the same corporation. I'm quoting the location. We're conducting regular surveys with the different companies that have settled within our free zones. And we ask them usually what are the reasons for them to have settled here. And there are usually three recurring comments that top up the list. It's usually location, quality of the infrastructure and setup, and proximity of vicinity market. and you say it's not only about incentives and other incentives that have been quoted, these are the three recurring comments that top up. Obviously, being in Tangiers, we are on the Strait of Gibraltar. Strait of Gibraltar, two key figures. The Strait of Gibraltar witnesses 20% of global trade. We're talking about roughly 40 million containers or TEUs are crossing the strait. And obviously, this development is located at the heart of this, at this crossing point, at the crossroad between east and west route and north and south. You see the proximity of Europe. Now, for investors, that means competitiveness. It means more efficiency. The genuine ability to produce car parts, textile, aeronautic parts, and deliver them within 1 day, 1 day and a half to most European capitals means a lot for industrialists and investors. The port very quickly was developed in 3 phases. Phase 1, which is a primarily container port, but also vehicle port. It has capacity of 3 million TEUs or containers, in addition to 1 million vehicles. There is a second port which is there just for road traffic. That is very important because a large chunk of the exports and imports are actually using trucks. And then the third port, which is being developed, will bring up the total capacity of Tangier Med to 8 million TEUs, which will make it the first port in the Med Sea in terms of container handling capacity. I think it was said, the word was said a bit earlier, connectivity. Connectivity means a lot. This is one of the key points for the continuous development, not only of the port, but for investors that are settling within the zone to continuously broaden the spectrum of their exports. I can pick up an example. We have companies that have started recently exports to Brazil, knowing that this had never been in any of their business planning. I'm talking about automotive parts, for instance. This is roughly what I'm talking about in terms of the total development of free zones that we have as of today. They span over a total surface of 1,200 hectares, with representing 4 billion euros of yearly exports, and most importantly, 2 billion euros of private industrial FDI. Now I stress it, industrial, because industrial means for us, obviously, job creation. The various sectors very quickly are automotive, aeronautics, textile, and electronics. These are I'm talking about activities that hadn't been even thought of 10 years ago. In terms of, and obviously forgot to mention services, which is a very important point, and this is a subject that we very often touch with Isidoro about the different objectives of free zones. So I hope I had promised to be very concise. I think I did not hit yet the 5 minutes. This is just a final slide to show you what has been accomplished in the automotive sector. We have just in the automotive sector, in the last 5 years, we have the largest car plant in Africa that's settled, which is a 1 billion euro investment by Renault Nissan. They produce roughly 400,000 cars on a yearly basis. But beyond this, we have 80 what we call tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers that are producing car parts for most of the OEMs, most of them being positioned in Europe, but not only in Europe. And that represents, in terms of FDI just in this sector, 650 million euros. And obviously we are continuously developing and looking at, but I think this is a good demonstration of how free zones do help and do foster, not only contribute to industrial GDP, but how do they contribute in developing and anchoring an economic activity into an area that was, I would say, a virgin area. So I think I hit the 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is a huge pleasure for me to be here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Christine. I'm representing the International Network for Small and Medium Enterprises based in Italy, in Rome. My, let's say, question was today to speak a little bit more about small and medium enterprises that play a vital role in the ecosystem we are speaking about for the last 1.5 days. Let me first of all also congratulate Dr. Samir and the World Free Zones Organization for organizing this first very successful meeting, I guess, and thank you all for your attention that I will try to draw a little bit to the smaller enterprises, to the small and medium enterprises that are somehow, even in your economies, I'm sure, the backbone of our economies. We didn't really talk a lot about small and medium enterprises these days, so I am happy to take over a little bit this role, and I know somebody of the panelists will follow up as well. Let me give you some points I was looking at by listening to the last panels. First of all, we spoke about future. When you think about future, maybe I'm a young person, so what I am associating immediately is, on the one hand, employment, on the other hand, growth, sustainable growth, inclusive growth, and how can you attract this in free zones and even outside the free zones through innovation. And we had an amazing keynote yesterday who gave us, let's say, an inspiring speech on what to do to remain competitive on a global scale. And what we learned again, or heard again, is that the ideas can change our lives. So first of all, our business lives, but hopefully at the end also the market and the lifestyle and the wealth of all the people. So when it comes to free zones, I would like to ask the leaders in the room to check how much you do for small and medium-sized enterprises in your free zones. First of all, are they agents, tools for innovation? This was a question that was put to me by the chairman. Yes, I guess for sure. They are a kind of engine for innovation, as they are normally more flexible, more easy to adapt to changes and requests. They are also more able to take the risk, because if they do fail, what happens is part of the game. It will not have the same implications as if a large enterprise fails. But we see that not so many small and medium enterprises for now take benefit or advantage of the services offered in the free zones. And I guess there is some space also for the policymakers to give some incentives to make sure there is more interest for the small and medium enterprises to settle, to also develop inside the free zones, and to give back the benefits to the local territory. As I was mentioning before, employment is the second factor. We heard amazing figures about how many people are employed in, for example, China, in the free zones and in other parts of the world. Nevertheless, the first, let's say, actors to employ people are small and medium enterprises. And this altogether, I would like to just refer to a little best practice also from our network. First of all, INSME has been created in 2004 under the umbrella of the OECD and the Italian Ministry for Economic Development, and the members are not small enterprises, but knowledge owners from all over the world, so governments, financial actors, UN organizations, chambers of commerce, public and private support organizations, academy, with the aim to sit down with open-minded people to see how the ecosystem can change. And from that point of view, I would suggest, on the one hand to the policymakers and on the other hand to the leaders, in the future for free zones, to involve small and medium enterprises more, to work on skills development, which we see as fundamental. If you look at the recipes of success, for example, for Silicon Valley, it is mainly two things. One is funding, so provide some funding, maybe there is some venture capital available for small and medium enterprises. On the other hand, it was on training, connecting and on training. I promised you to give an example. This example this time comes from Brazil. They did a very impressive case study on how to get small and micro enterprises involved in the supply chain of multinationals and, let's say, big companies, with the aim to show that there was a benefit, a financial benefit for the large entrepreneurs if they invest in local micro and small enterprises. What they had to do was to skill up the small enterprises, because they had to learn on how a big company works. And this is something that is all clear to us, but we can do more in the free zones from this point of view. If you think about enlarging these capacities, there will be more ideas. As we heard yesterday, the ideas can come to the market, and finally there will be more benefit. So this is what I consider is connected to the future of free zones, which is connected to internationalization. If you think about a young person, somebody told me yesterday when we were talking about the Dubai environment here, it is very difficult still now to create a non-necessity-driven startup community. So what can you do here? You might want to invest in specific skills that have their benefit again, because you will attract financial and support businesses around and in the whole territory, not only in the free zone, to make sure that people can develop their own global ideas and internationalize their business immediately. So this can be done through organizations as the World Free Zone Organization that can push somehow here as well to showcase some best practice. And from our side, we would be happy to collaborate and give some good examples as we have. Last point. Yesterday we heard a little bit also about the clusters and so on and so forth and the free zones. There are different types of benchmarking around. So there are people that are setting up a training curriculum for managers, and we have heard today that it is planned to have a certification in many of your free zones, that there might be an international standard. I would like to challenge you and invite you maybe to extend a part also on the involvement of small and medium-sized enterprises to check if they consider just product innovation or also service innovation, process innovation, business model innovation, social innovation. There is many things that we can push a little bit to make sure impact is created on a long-term scale also for the future, and make sure we create some knowledge-based job possibility for the young people, and to give more and more reciprocity to free zones and the local economy. So this is from our side an invitation to take advantage of the benchmark assessments that are already in place, specifically on innovation management for entrepreneurs. And with this, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and if you have any questions, I am on your disposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here all with you today, and it's a very interesting topic that we're talking about, how free zones could have a very positive impact on how businesses could grow and how businesses could flourish in different parts of the world. And it's very important to understand, to understand a little bit about how other places are doing it around the world. Today, talking about Dubai and how Dubai has played an impactful role on creating free zones within this part of the world, or if we can, pinpoint the Gulf and the Middle East in general, it shows that it is a very important factor to bring and develop certain contexts. And the clustering model in itself has played a very important role in creating the actual buzz that Dubai has today. Focus, development of certain specific areas where we weren't the best at because of the obvious reasons. Today, the population is small, the area is growing, and development is happening. but we needed to bring these capabilities to life. So we've actually played a major role in actually bringing what His Highness's vision to what we are in today. Just to give you a brief history of how we came to being. I'm talking about TCOM investments, and if I'm going to be specific, I'm talking about the idea of Dubai Internet City and how this free zone was brought to life in 1999 by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed's vision. The idea was to bring these clusters to touch base into an industry that was highly specialized at that point of time, to a market that was highly dependent on importing of goods from around the world. That in 1999 had a very ambitious vision, which was to build all of these capabilities on the ground here in the UAE and in Dubai, to be specific, so that it could, at one point of time, be an exporting region instead of an importing region. And that is the case today. Today we have a very vibrant amount of free zones that are doing a great job in attracting talent to the region, attracting first-tier companies and first-tier products from all over the world. And the development of first-tier products and talent is actually happening on the ground today. Since if we can talk about the zones that I represent, we've actually today have around 70,000 people that work within these zones that we look after. And we are focused on the idea of clustering and how clustering could add value. So we focused on IT, we focused on media, we focused on energy, outsourcing, studio production, and other areas that at one point of time weren't something that we would have expected out of the region here. SME, and just to talk a little bit about how SME is a very critical factor of how the growth of Dubai. I think Dubai has been built on the fact that SMEs play a major role on how businesses grow, and how the bigger employers, I think, would be SMEs in this part of the world. So as a part of our development of the zones and the development of the communities that we run, is the focus on how these communities could play a very important role of the growth. Communities are the cornerstones of free zones, at least from where we stand, because we look after the service part of the equation and we don't look after the hardware. So community building is a critical factor. It helps SMEs grow, it helps SMEs network, it helps SMEs see opportunities that they might have missed or they might are interested in actually pursuing. So it's a major factor of how we do. So we've actually developed a certain layer on top of what we do best, which is attracting companies and trying to go hand in hand with these multinationals and start up certain communities that will flourish and develop talent, which in essence would result into a stronger economy with a stronger talent pool that people could tap into. Addition to that, I think there are certain things that we need to focus on also, which is basically now, after developing the SME platform, how can we actually make it happen? Because it's not about only developing a platform and hoping that it works. It's actually, there is a major role that the government, as well as the private sector, should go hand in hand in making it a success. And that is by spending the time, money, and effort on the ground in supporting such activities. These are some of the experiences that we had in Dubai. I think things talk about themselves. We have actually achieved a lot over the last few years, and I think with the strategic initiatives that His Highness has put forward for the years to come, I think we will only develop further and grow our talent pool in the initial phase, as well as our industries and our free zones to be a catalyst for development and support of innovation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm really delighted to be in this session, which the title itself of the session, I think it's quite progressive and provocative, which is the future of free zones and the free zones of the future. I would like first to start by thanking, Dr. Mohammed Zar'ouni, the chairperson of the Free Zones Organization, and Mr. Samir Hamrouni. I remember this was an idea more than 2 years back, and discussing how we can benefit from the vibrant success stories of Dubai, especially the free zones of Dubai. And in UNIDO, UNIDO have been working over the last more than 40 years in developing strategies for industrial parks, economic zones, free zones, incubators, accelerators. UNIDO have been working in more than 120 countries around the globe, because the free zones or the industrial parks or the incubators is a very important component in what we call an investment promotion cycle. In the investment promotion cycle, to develop the investment, you need several components. One of them is the infrastructure. And this is why UNIDO have immediately came into the picture, with our Director General, Dr. Li Yong. He was very instrumental in China. He comes from China in developing the free zones and industrial parks in China. As you know, one of the most important trends of the economic development of China is industrial parks. And I'm very pleased and honored that UNIDO have developed, the industrial parks and free zones strategy for China more than 25 years back in the early 80s. I'm here to share with you what are we intending to provide or to develop through the Free Zones Organization. I represent the UNIDO Investment and Technology Promotion Office in the Kingdom of Bahrain. It is a part of a network of offices, mainly they are in industrialized countries. We are in Japan, we are in South Korea, we are in China, and we are in Italy, and we are in Russia, and in Bahrain, and now we're going to have an office in Turkey, Brazil, and Nigeria. This is going to be open before the end of this year. As you see, Bahrain was the first country in the developing, we can say, kind of countries. Yes, it's part of the Gulf countries, but still within the UN setup, it is a developing country. But take into consideration the financial resources in the Gulf region, the wisdom of the organization was to open this office in 1996. So we become part of this network. This office is mainly, what do they do? This mobilization of foreign direct investment from industrialized countries to developing countries. Investment in cash investment, in technology transfer, know-how, and market outlet. This is how we started 40 years back. But when we started our office in 1996 in Bahrain, we have realized that there is a big problem and there is a stagnation in the mobilization of foreign direct investment, because if you work, especially our target is SMEs, we work also in medium and medium large, but mainly it is MSMEs, micro, small, and medium, because also we added we added the micro to the small and medium. We realized that we have to reverse what we call the cycle of investment promotion. Reverse it means we have to start working on the domestic investment to mobilize and attract foreign direct investment. And this is, we're very proud and honored to say this have been started in Bahrain, in a developing country, where it went back to the world community, as it is a very important setup for mobilization of foreign direct investment. Domestic investment through entrepreneurship. And I'm very pleased to hear that today from my colleague Christina, and also, Mr. Junaid, when we have been talking about free zones, and we're talking about free zones of the future. You know, I don't want to criticize the work of what free zones have been doing, but me coming from SMEs background, and the world is changing, and now we're all talking about the role of SMEs in developing national economies. Developing SMEs today, especially to tackle what we call job creation and youth employment, this is a very important, of course, always component of strategies of any economic development program of a country. So the free zones of the future should, and this is what's happening today, to play a very important role. I don't know how free zones, the existing ones, have been looking into that. But now the new trend, I just came from China. I was in China 2 weeks back, and I was in India. We're developing what we call the Maritime Silk Road Investment Promotion Program, where we are going to take the free zones, or the new trend, and this is maybe a message I'm delivering to you, and we're starting this, we're launching the program in September in the China Investment and Trade Fair in Xiamen, and you know, the CIFIT is one of the biggest and the largest investment fairs worldwide. You know, more than 3,000 participants always participate in that fair. We are launching the Maritime Silk Road East-West. East, of course, is Japan, South Korea, India, China, Malaysia, Indonesia. West is the Middle East. This is what is being traditionally known as the Maritime Silk Road, but we're also adding Central Europe and Africa. One of the most important setup, it will be how the free zones will work in developing the domestic investment to attract foreign direct investment. Because this should be the new trend of free zones. Free zones have, well, now we know the regulations, we know what is required in customs, we're doing, bilateral agreement between free zones, All of this now is known, we understood it, and I think even in this, today, this general conference, have been now well done. Now what is the future? The future, we have to start from now talking about what should be the services to be offered in a free zone. The services of the free zone, how you will develop the domestic investment to mobilize foreign direct investment. How you will develop the clusters of SMEs in a country through innovation and entrepreneurship, where it will be a pillar within the free zone, okay, to develop the domestic investment to attract foreign direct investment. Because nowadays trends have changed completely in the way we mobilize foreign investment. Nowadays, the trend, the World Bank, the IFC, UNIDO, UNCTAD, WTO, OECD, they're all focusing on mechanisms, tools, programs to develop the domestic investment through innovation and entrepreneurship to attract foreign direct investment. So automatically, this should be part of the new trend and the future trend of free economic zones. I come back quickly. You need to have developed the WEBZA. I don't know if you know the WEBZA. WEBZA was the World Economic Processing Zones. These have been started by Dr. Bolt and others, if you know them, in the late 80s. This was the UNIDO division. But the WEBZA, and this is also, we have to be very careful on the birth of this new organization, where the trend should go. WEBZA still is there, but WEBZA have been kept on the setup of how to develop the infrastructure from a legal point, from a structure point of a free zone. It didn't carry on and took what we call services to be provided within the free zone. And this is our pledge and our urge to this new organization, that you should focus on what should be the services to be developed in existing, but should be the future of the free zones and the future free zones. And here where we will come, and already we have signed an agreement and a memorandum of understanding with the World Organization, where we will bring to you our good practice on how we are doing programs for startups, growth and expand of micro and small and medium businesses, where we're developing these programs in more than 48 countries, from Uruguay to China with several partners. I would like to end here because I think I have been allocated 9 minutes, and maybe we can come from the discussions, but we are ready and we're going to work hand in hand with the World Organization of Free Zones And before I end, I would like to also announce that during the first Worldwide International Entrepreneurs Investment Forum, which took place in Bahrain, there was a request from Dubai, and we're very honored that Mr. Zaruni had a meeting with our Director General that we are looking into organizing the second International Entrepreneurs Investment Forum to take place in Dubai. And I hope if we're going to have the conference of the free zones next year, could be in parallel, and here where we can bring the concern of my colleague, Mrs. Christine, and of course myself, how we would like to indulge and bring SMEs and entrepreneurs and startups and investment promotion program for SMEs within free zones. Thank you very much.
We have a few more minutes, and I think some summing up was in order. We have been exposed to 6 different views with a high degree of convergence, in some cases, about the future of free zones. We have seen confidence in future growth of free zones in Latin America. We have seen interest in an automated environment, in customs and other matters that would bring transparency and safety, security, and efficiency. We have seen the perspective of a live case of a successful free zone thinking about its own future. We have seen the peculiar role that SMEs could play inside and probably outside the free zones as part of an overspill of impact of free zones in the host country, including the presentation of a Brazilian example. We have seen the interest that, at least in the Middle East free zones, have had success in foster developed in specific areas with an emphasis in clusters, and how SMEs, again, could be cornerstone for foreign zone growth. And finally, we have seen that the future of free zones includes a question that can be capital. What are the services to be offered by free zones so that SMEs inside and perhaps also outside of the free zones can foster and can take advantage of the existence of this important tool? Fortunately, we now have a little time for an exchange of views. I believe the moderator should be moderate. This is why I cut my comments. And if there are any questions or comments from the floor or between panel members, we have a few minutes, not many. If it's not the case, then thank you all, first of all, the panelists, first of all, the World Free Zone Organization for organizing this magnificent event, and we can go on with the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your participation. Well, we're nearly at the end of this year's conference. Taking a big step back from what's going on here, I'd like to throw out a few things to you as an outsider, so please entertain me. I'd like to know things like, where are your bottlenecks? What's the problem? Why aren't you doing as well as you could and should be? Is it the government? If so, perhaps next time we can have some government officials with us. Why not? To answer questions directly from you. Because it is about collaboration and sharing information, isn't it? Is it about finding the people with the right skills, in which case setting up your education programs is a fantastic thing? What is it? What are your bottlenecks? Why aren't you doing as well as you could and should be? I'd love to find out more about that. The other thing is this, and it feeds off of Professor Xavier yesterday and other things we've heard about. If you cast your mind back to yesterday, we saw, I think it's Liliana, her presentation had the teddy bear manufacturer and the fish seller, essentially. They collaborated together, didn't they? Aeroplanes were sharing loads and that sort of thing. And they benefited immensely. Now think about this same sort of system, but for free zones around the world, a sort of intra-free zone preferential trading thing that you could come up with. You see, as an outsider again, I am amazed that we're in the year 2015 and we're still talking about these things. But it's actually human nature, isn't it? We sort of look inwards until we sort certain things out, and then we look outwards. So my feeling is that this is going to be, with the creation of this organization, you're going to start looking more towards each other in a different way. Let's find out next year. In the meantime, please allow me to invite Dr. Zaraoni back to the stage to say a few words.
Distinguished guests, good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to stand in front of you once again, this time to thank you all for attending World Free Zone Organization First International Conference and Exhibition. I sincerely hope that all of you enjoyed your time and, more importantly, benefited from the workshop and the speeches. I am delighted to announce that 675 delegates from 70 countries participated in our conference, and over 50% of the voting members have attended. After the conclusion of this conference, the registered members will meet again in the afternoon for the first General Assembly for the World Free Zone Organization. We have a busy year ahead in which we will work hard to bring on board more members and provide more services to our members. The first year has been challenging, but we are very satisfied with the achievements, both on the membership side and the services side, culminating in this successful event. I share another good news with you. The whole conference was televised live through the internet, and 1,637 people viewed it fully, or in part, from 124 different countries. The conference next year will be held again in the United Arab Emirates before it moves to another country in 2017. I look forward to seeing you all again next year. We promised to make the next conference even more interesting. Finally, a word of thanks to all our sponsors, speakers, organizers, the media, and everyone else who helped us in staging and running this event and made it a success. Thank you, and see you next year.
Thank you, Dr. Zaraoni. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for being here. It is now time for lunch. Before you go, though, can I just let you know that there have been changes to the workshop to the workshops that are on offer. So please do check with the registration desk outside before you go so you find out the latest on that. There is a General Assembly for members. That is going to happen at 2:30. 2:30, please. So do go along if you are a member. Thank you very much for your tolerance, for your time. 2 o'clock, not 2:30. It is at 2 o'clock, I'm told. See you next year. Bye-bye.